His savage actions against his best friend will inspire you. The two world-renowned men were speeding down a highway. Something didn't sit well with the first man, though. What he did next would make international news, and you'll also feel very emotional midway through. There's also a grand reveal at the end, which ties the whole story together. If you grew up in the West, I 100% guarantee it shines a whole new light on the video. Gerard was born on the east coast of America in 1966. His childhood was miserable. His biological father, Purcell, was someone he never met, and his stepfather, Jimmy, left home when Gerard was only 2 years old. When Jimmy left, Gerard's mother, Lorna, moved them to the east side of town. This place was notable for having the highest rates of murder in the whole of the city. Gerard's mother, Lorna, was not meant to be one. She never praised her children, showed any sense of pride for them, or even seemed to be happy around them. Lorna struggled with substance addiction. While her children tried to sleep in the next room, she would entertain men loudly. Gerald yearned for a meaningful relationship with his mother, but her neglect made it impossible, and his hope turned to resentment. Now, Gerard was born a sweet, sensitive, and intelligent boy, but over time, his horrendous environment shaped him. Police were always stopping him. Gunfire rang out throughout his neighborhood, and stabbings happened so frequently that he didn't think twice if he saw an ambulance flying past. Gerard often thought of it as like being in hell, and as far as he could see, there was no escape. When Gerard was 7, he was walking down a street when a man grabbed him and pulled him into a building. This adult took full advantage of Gerard. Visions of this incident would haunt him for decades to come, fueling a rage inside him that needed an outlet. From that day on, Gerard vowed to become, in his own words, tough. Gerard was a fat boy who had trouble socializing and had a speech impediment. In the murder capital of his city, this was like a death sentence, and one day, an incident extremely cruel, even by these standards, happened. The human mind can only take so much. What happened next is something that broke him, but it also set him on a trajectory that would see him gain explosive, unprecedented, international success. Gerard had often felt fat and ugly. The other children teased him about this, and as a way of coping, he spent time with the little street animals that roamed his neighborhood. He tended to this one animal, Julius, every day, and in a world where nobody loved him, he found connection, and he realized that this was the first and only thing that he cared for in his young life, at the age of 10. One day, one of his bullies, Gary, approached Gerard. This is the thing that would set the rest of Gerard's life in motion. He saw Gerard tending lovingly to Julius, and a wicked thought crossed his mind. He walked over to them, his eyes fixed on Julius. He was still only young, but was older and much bigger than Gerard. And before Gerard could do anything, Gary had already grabbed Julius. Gary looked straight into Gerard's eyes and held Julius up by the neck. Time froze in that instant. He took his other hand and wrapped it around its little head. The thing struggled in his hands for a few seconds. Then, Gary tightened his fists and pulled them hard in opposite directions. The only thing that Gerard had ever loved fell to the ground, broken and in pieces. Then, that dead Gary purposefully threw Julius's blood onto Gerard. In that moment, a fire deep inside Gerard was lit. Gerard had finally reached his breaking point. He had always been a timid boy, terrified of confrontation. Looking at what Gary had done, he entered berserk mode, running straight towards the bully. In an instant, all his anger at the world, his mistreatment, and this boy's disgusting actions were all channeled into a flurry of fists. Gary was astonished that this little kid, who he thought was easy prey, could move with such speed and power. Gerard drilled his fists into Gary's head and body. Gary was soon terrified. Gerard beat him mercilessly in the street, and then Gary limped away, defeated. Then, just like that, this life-altering event was over. In Gerard's mind, a switch had flicked. Gerard would no longer live in fear. Now he would be the one others feared. Then, he sat down, and he cried. there are even more WTF details about Gerard's childhood. These things explain why he would become the most successful, the very best in his field later on in life. He surrendered to his hostile environment, joining a gang. They called themselves the Stompers, and for good reason. By age 11, he was taking mind-altering hallucinogenic drugs and snorting up white powder. And before his 13th birthday, Gerard had already been arrested nearly 40 times for various petty crimes. Lorna, his mother, passed when Gerard was 16. He would express to others that her passing gave him a soulless nature that he used to his advantage. Sometimes he mused that her passing was one of the best things that ever happened to him. Gerard grew up with the cards stacked against him. Statistically, he was most likely to live a life of street crime, drugs, and violence. To escape this fate, he needed a miracle. And he did get that miracle. Because of an event that easily never could have happened, his life would take an incredible turn for the better. Gerard was sent to Tryon State School for Boys when he was 12 years old, a reform school designed to rehabilitate the most troubled kids in the city. As part of their mission to keep them off the streets, Tryon State School set up some extracurricular activities for the students. This is where Gerard met Bobby, an accomplished professional. Watching over him in class, Bobby noticed qualities that he'd never seen in a student before. Gerard had an incredible amount of natural aptitude and underneath a level of intelligence. For his part, Gerard felt invigorated under Bobby's tutelage. He had finally found someone who believed in him. For maybe the first time in his young life, he could envision making a future for himself. Bobby saw the desire in Gerard's eyes and allowed him into class under two conditions. He would have to behave himself, and he would have to maintain his grades. This was Gerard's one shot to escape hell. So he behaved, and Bobby described the young street gangster as a complete gentleman. Gerard was known to dedicate himself to his craft for hours a day, and when he went home, he'd obsessively read and study more. Eventually, Gerard did so well that he outgrew Bobby. Bobby effectively told him, "Look, your talent is so immense, and your work ethic and intelligence so impressive, that you're wasted under me. You need to go to the best schools in the country, with the best teachers." This happened when he was 13, so only a year after being admitted to reform school. Bobby would still see him from time to time thereafter, and join him in class. Everyone was shocked when Gerard would actually sometimes outperform the teacher. Bobby described him as perfect. Everyone saw the immense capability and bright future lying ahead of Gerard. What wasn't so easily foreseen was the violence, the heartbreak, and the chaos that the whole world would take note of. After finishing with Bobby, Gerard received personalized schooling from some of the best teachers in the country, and then he graduated into professional life exceptionally quickly. By the age of 18, Gerard was already making waves and earning good money. As expected, his growth was meteoric, and by the time he was in his 20s, Gerard had exceeded all of his peers and was making millions as a marketing professional, and gotten the whole industry talking about him. This caught the attention of Donald. Just like Gerard, Donald came from poverty and a violent, crime-stricken area. Through his own will and intelligence, he had attained exceptional business skills and marketing flair. When he was imprisoned once, he filled his time reading classic literature and the works of past philosophers. And Donald's discipline had paid off. He was rubbing shoulders with presidents, celebrities, and even royalty. And now, this titan had noticed Gerard. He could make his career soar even higher. Donald was known to every person in the business. He'd worked with the most accomplished companies and the biggest players. He cut the biggest deals and had made the companies, his clients, and himself life-changing amounts of money, easily in the multiple millions. But there were even more things that attracted Gerard to Donald. He was undeniably clever, but was also charismatic, whereas this was an area Gerard often struggled with growing up. Donald was known for his million-dollar smile, which he always sported, and his fire engine-like voice that filled the room with energy. He was known for his eccentric style and often flaunted his massive wealth with Rolls Royces and expensive suits. He'd proclaim the wonder of living in America. Only here could a poor kid from the ghetto rise to become the best of the best. And this was an inspirational story, especially for certain impoverished demographics. Donald also used his fame to shine light on racism, and he himself contributed to several black charities. This man, huh? What a catch. Gerard, by now in his early 20s, had already been mentored by several distinguished men. He often saw them as father figures, ones that he never really had. But by sheer bad luck, he had lost his two closest mentors. His first mentor had passed from old age, and another father figure, Jimmy Jacobs, had passed from cancer. And these two devastating losses occurred within 3 years. Gerard buried his head in his friend Jose's chest one night and sobbed uncontrollably. And now, by good fortune, another father figure swooped in to rescue him. For his part, Donald was there for Gerard during his moment of grief. He saw Gerard with nobody to pick him up outside the airport when he was on his way to Jimmy's funeral, and immediately ordered a limousine for him. Once there, Donald made sure to be at hand to support Gerard whenever he needed. The two would hang out for months afterwards in places like LA. Gerard could feel his bond deepening with this man, and he slowly began to favour Donald over his current colleagues. Donald pampered him with luxurious presents, a Rolls-Royce convertible, and a limousine with a combined value of nearly $400,000. Donald further earned Gerard's trust by helping with his finances too, adjusting accounts and speaking to bankers for him. You see, Gerard was extremely capable at one thing. He alone was able to get millions of clients to sign up and become paying customers. Despite his natural ability, he didn't really understand how to safeguard his money, especially against his wife. Things were rocky between them. Now, Gerard wasn't the perfect husband by any means, but what his wife did is just straight up shocking and cold. And how Donald tackled this situation is rather satisfying. This is what happened. She'd claim she was pregnant, but then when a private investigator was hired to investigate the hospital she allegedly miscarried at, there were no records of this. In another incident, she turned up at the Merrill Lynch offices, which held Gerald's fortune. She came unannounced and demanded $2 million was transferred to her. This took place 1 hour after Gerard's mentor, Jimmy, was pronounced dead, while he was still in shock and grieving. When she was denied, she threw a tantrum. Merrill Lynch Vice President James Brady was shocked by her coldness, and later she didn't even attend Jimmy's funeral. According to Brady, she spent $1 million of Gerard's earnings within 2 months. Donald personally helped Gerard switch all of his accounts back to his name and cancel joint credit cards he had with his wife. Donald gave Gerard safety and control over his own fortune, further solidifying his father figure bond with him. It would have been a satisfying moment for them both when Gerard's wife, one day, flippantly felt like writing herself a check for $581,000 for expenses, and that check bounced. Embarrassed, she later denied ever writing the check. In a moment that must have had Gerald and Donald rolling laughing, Donald leaked a copy of the check to all who were involved, and her denial was roundly disproven. When Gerard's wife filed for divorce after less than a year, Donald made sure to get the best of the best to represent Gerard, a lawyer called Howard Weitzman. Weitzman even had clients like Michael Jackson. Only someone with the most valuable contacts and proper experience could have pulled this move. All the while, Donald would pull strings to get Gerard the best jobs for the biggest paychecks, increasing his already astonishing fortune. By now, Gerard even felt comfortable enough to move to Ohio to live inside Donald's mansion. Donald, one of the most influential men in America, pampered him with trips to high-end nightclubs and concerts. Gerard had surely made it for real now. Slowly, Gerard lost contact with his old friends. Jose, whose chest he had cried in when Jimmy died, and his remaining team too. His friends now were people hired by Donald. It was like his whole world revolved around Donald. It was his choice though, right? He had everything he had ever dreamt of, and more. Donald, his new father, had rescued him from a bad position, and nobody would try to manipulate or isolate him. And Donald surely wouldn't ruin his life and career, right? As he and Donald did business together and rose through the ranks, Gerard found himself using the same lines and inflections. Donald gave him a book called Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. And very strangely, Donald actually kept 24 copies of this book in his home. The book was filled with conspiracies against white people, and Gerard's old team were predominantly white. He slowly turned against some of his old team, accusing them of stealing, because Donald had suggested it. If Gerard ever felt down, Donald would get a personal driver to ferry expensive prostitutes back and forth to the mansion to pleasure him. At other times, Donald whispered in his ear about how they were like partners in crime. Two black men at the top of their game against the world. This fed into Gerard's distrust of society that he'd justifiably had since he was a child. Donald fanned the flames of Gerard's ego. He'd say he was a historical figure and he had a special destiny. A month after he moved in, Donald brought Gerard to be baptized, and for weeks afterwards, Gerard told people he was born again. He had a new life now and was a new person. It's not fair to say that it was 100% Donald manipulating Gerard. Gerard's childhood demons had never really been addressed, and now he was covering them with money and illicit substances. There were incidents of SA towards women and public meltdowns, but Donald always made sure these went away with some hush money. Gerard's demons were never corrected by Donald. Until now, all of Gerard's mentors had tried to temper his soulless nature. They gave him love and taught him to be a gentleman and to have honor. But these men had now either been isolated from Gerard or they had passed. Donald's laissez-faire attitude encouraged his wildness, and Gerard began to associate with criminals and drag race in the street. Gerard's reputation began to change. He wasn't seen as the miracle success story anymore, the prodigy who raised himself from nothing. Instead, he was a loose cannon who had let wild success get to his head at the age of 24. In his youth, when Gerard was just starting his career, so only 6 years before this time, he would hug his colleagues and quietly tend to his little animals. This was the sweet, sensitive part of him that was now a faded memory. There was an emptiness in him now. In his most successful periods, when he was earning millions, one observer, Mike Katz, said he saw only frustration in Gerard's eyes. Was this all there was to life? Why had wild success not filled his void? Gerard had expensive cars in the dozens, wore gold jewellery, and had casual affairs with many, many women who were drawn to him in high-end nightclubs. His only friends now were sycophants drawn to his wealth, yes men, or those paid by Donald to watch over him. Moreover, the skills he'd acquired to advance in the industry were beginning to disintegrate. Gerard was no longer hungry to learn and better himself. At the peak of his professional success, no one truly loved him. He had no one to watch over him, just like when he was a small boy. Donald, for all his business knowledge, couldn't or wouldn't stop Gerard from imploding. He only gave Gerard luxury and reassurance when he acted out. Really, he should have confronted him and talked some sense into him. Donald was fearful of Gerard leaving him because he had drawn lucrative contracts to benefit himself. He would take a cut of whatever Gerard made for the company. So, he never disciplined him, even though it was for Gerard's own good, because he was more concerned with his bank account. Donald made sure to have an iron grip over Gerard's mind and his money. In one instance, Gerard appeared in court for SA and was forced to admit his bank statements. It was revealed that Donald was holding on to $2 million of Gerard's money, which should have been paid to him 8 months prior. Gerard was still under Donald's spell, and when the authorities questioned him on this, he simply replied, "I don't know." The truth is that Gerard deteriorated in all areas under Donald's mentorship. After nearly a decade of working together, it became undeniable that Donald was mishandling his money. He'd write frivolous expenses and charges into contracts to suit himself, and he would skim as much as possible from Gerard's salary. As an example, Donald would make up some management fee and pay himself hundreds of thousands of Gerard's money. He'd routinely take half of his earnings to enrich himself. In the end, it was estimated that Donald had grifted tens of millions from the man he was supposed to be nurturing. In another instance, when Gerard had been with Donald for a few years, a young admirer of Gerard's had written a letter to him. He'd wondered if he could talk to him on the phone as he was dying of cancer. Gerard immediately called back, but was told he was a year too late. Donald had purposefully hidden these letters from him. Gerard cursed Donald, and he sat down and he cried. And now for the event that would be reported by the world. This would mark the point where Gerard and Donald's relationship fully imploded. And what happened after was very shocking for Gerard. One day much later, Gerard and Donald were in Donald's Rolls Royce, along with a small entourage of other cars. The spell that Donald cast over Gerard was now all but gone. There was an emotional turmoil within Gerard. His wife betrayed his trust. Life had beaten and mistreated him. His parents weren't there for him, and the mentors who did love him were now gone. His new father figure, who he loved and hated at the same time, had undeniably taken advantage of him too. Gerard was still phenomenally rich, but knew that much of his fortune had been unfairly stolen. Gerard was furious looking at the fine things that he felt Donald had paid for with his stolen money, and the rage became unbearable. All of Donald's wrongdoings were clear to Gerard now. Now he would pay. He exploded and kicked Donald in the back of the head and began choking that motherfucker out. Donald immediately braked the car. Gerard was immediately all over him and assaulting him. It was like the incident with Julius again, and in his berserk mode, Gerard was extremely fast and strong. Donald escaped the car, and Gerard exited the Rolls-Royce too in close pursuit. However, Donald did a quick back turn while Gerard was trying to pummel him and managed to jump back into the Rolls-Royce and drive off. One of the other cars in the entourage pulled up to Gerard. It was Donald's bodyguard. Isidore asked what the hell was going on and told Gerard to get in the car. They're in the middle of the highway, which they shouldn't be, with other cars zooming by, looking at them with confusion. Gerard's emotions were still raw though, and he did not comply. Isidore stepped out of his car. He was the bodyguard of a man whose net worth was in the tens of millions. He had a thick neck and thick shoulders, and Donald had personally selected this man to protect him. Without thinking twice, Gerard leapt at him and smashed him in the face twice, easily shattering his left orbital bone and knocking him out cold. It was over in seconds. Isidore, too, when he came to, would retreat hastily at the sight of this absolute unstoppable force that was Gerard. Then, police sirens. By now, Gerard had been joined by 4 of his friends, and he was beginning to panic. Gerard, throughout this whole ordeal, was actually in possession of a half brick of white substance, while his friend Louise had a half pound of green leaf in his bag. This was a disastrous situation, and Gerard expected the worst. But he would be shocked by what happened next. Instead of arresting them, Gerard saw that the police were actually excited to see him. He didn't expect to get out of a very bad-looking situation, but that's exactly what happened. These cops didn't even think to question why, they were just standing in the middle of the highway. They were so pleased to see Gerard that they happily drove him and his friends back to their South Beach hotel. And when they arrived at his hotel, the officer even asked him, "Are you okay, Mr. Gerard?" He had bricks of illicit substances and had just assaulted 2 men in the highway and stood there, and the police were now treating him like a celebrity. He couldn't believe his luck. Gerard said he attacked Donald because he loved him, but when he was 32, he also sued him for $100 million. In the court case, there would have been legal documents. Remember when I said these guys were marketing professionals? That is half true, and now here's the full truth. In Gerard's documents, you would have been able to see his full name. Michael Gerard Tyson, aka Iron Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet. As for Gerard's intelligence, which I spoke about earlier, boxing is like a science, and Tyson's style, although brutish, was also very educated. Mike loves to read about history and often references obscure historical figures. And I think it should be noted that he's much smarter than most people give him credit for. Here's a fun fact, his brother Rodney is actually a neurosurgeon, so I believe some of his cleverness does run in the family. In the defendant's documents, you'd see Donald King, aka Don King, the most famous boxing promoter of all time. Of course, Tyson's many public controversies made international news, as did this lawsuit. In the end, Mike only got $14 million, but the story still has a happy ending. Don King, although financially successful, is a 92-year-old man now, with multiple allegations of wrongdoing against him by some prominent names. The GOAT, Muhammad Ali, felt wronged by him, and other legendary champions have also sued him for mishandling their money. Also, did you know King once stomped a man to death and then served just under 4 years in prison? This was the second time he killed a man, by the way. Famous champion Larry Holmes is quoted saying this about King: "He looks black, lives white, and thinks green." Pete Dexter, a journalist, wrote, "For 15 cents, King will put his boys in the ring and the girls on the street. He is easiest to imagine as a disease." So, Don is still rich, but he has a much different public perception of him than Tyson. In stark contrast, the Mike Tyson of 2024 is a 57-year-old beloved public figure. He's done his best to make amends for his past transgressions, and is in a place of peace now, with a loving family by his side. He even said, "I'm sorry I did that," when talking about the attack during a podcast. As for his stolen millions, I don't think Tyson is doing too badly now. He is such a public figure that he could still make $20 million from his next fight with Jake Paul. At 57 years old, he is still one of, if not the biggest draw in combat sports. Tyson even soaked Don King in water when the pair crossed each other in 2018. Mike, who is a changed man now, apologized for his actions later and said it was immature. Further showing his growth as a human, he announced he would do his best to let go of the bitterness. The boy who was mistreated and mistreated is now in a place of peace. By all accounts, he tries his best to help those around him, and his demons no longer control him. He is sensitive and caring at his core. For example, he still loves those little street animals I talked about, pigeons, and he still nurtures them, even today. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Like if you liked the video, let's tickle the algorithm. Support the channel if you want. Thank you for watching. Night night.